Hello everybody, this is Bird Brain. We are nerdy for the birdies. The Eagles have just completed their bye week and we are at the mid-season point, so I figured this is a perfect time for us to do the annual mid-season grades for the position groups on the team. And just so you know, my grades are mostly not based off of a singular player, it's based off of the group, so some positional grades might be a little bit lower than people would expect. The other thing about it is I think some people may be upset that, like, oh, I don't have any D's or F's. To me, if a position group is a D or F in the NFL, it's an unplayable position group. And I don't think that this team has a group that is in totality a D or F. There may be players that are D or F caliber, but none of them are as a group in a totality that low. So my lowest grade is a C-, but I'll explain as we go through it. Anyway, let's start off with the quarterback position, which this grade is mostly reflective of Jalen Hurts because none of the other quarterbacks have taken any snaps this year, really, or at least any significant snaps, that is. But I'm giving this an A-. And the Jalen Hurts roller coaster this year has been a little bit all over the place. You know, the first couple of games, it was very quiet from him, where it wasn't highly productive. I thought he played pretty well against Dallas. Kind of game against the Chiefs. And then he had a pretty poor first half against the Rams. Really good second half against the Rams. Really good first half against the Bucks. Really poor second half against the Bucks, where he completed 0 passes. And then he had those 2 games, the Broncos game that was kind of meh, and the Giants game that was not great. But in the last 2 weeks, you know, he's put together some really strong performances. But I think overall he has been a plus on this season. And I'm giving him an A- because there have been things that have happened with this team that are out of his control. And there are things that have happened that are in his control. And I think that we are seeing a quarterback right now that is playing overall fairly well. He's been aggressive. He's making good decisions with the ball. He's not putting the ball continuously in harm's way. Again, he only has 2 turnovers on the year and 20 touchdowns. I'd like to see him more involved in the run game. I just feel like the team's holding that back and saving it for the postseason, but I think Jalen as a whole has been pretty good. There's a strong argument for him to be in the MVP conversation. I wouldn't say he is the MVP, but I think he deserves to be in that conversation, and he's on pace for some career highs, especially in touchdowns, so we'll see what he continues to do for this team. Next, we go to the running back / fullback position, and I'm giving this position a B+, and this is a really hard position to grade, because if you look on just the pure stats of it all, it's been a fairly unproductive position for most of the season, but I don't entirely really blame the running backs for that. If you watch Saquon individually, I think he's played very well this season. I think he has done the best that he can with what he has been given. I mean, there are times where, you know, they hand the ball off to him and there's a dude already in his face before he can even get going. I just don't expect Saquon to make those guys miss every single freaking time. That's just not going to happen. Obviously, those grades fall on other position groups of this team. But I think the running backs position, also with some of the other players, Saquon himself has been Saquon. I think he still looks pretty good and he's on pace for a really solid year. You know, Will Shipley's been injured for a huge chunk of the season, so he hasn't been very productive. I still don't think he's a great pure runner. He's someone that's more of a schematic runner, where you really have to scheme up the perfect look, get him these wide open holes that he can hit. I'd like to see them use him in space a little bit, get screens to him a little bit as well, kind of use him as a receiver. We just don't see that a ton in games. We saw A.J. Dillon for the first 6 games, and, you know, he was fine. It was largely unproductive. He obviously had the fumble against the Giants. Tank Bigsby, though, has come onto the scene as a running back, and I think he's definitely taken A.J. Dillon's job, and you can make an argument he may even be RB2 on this team. He doesn't offer much as a receiver, but in terms of just power running, yeah, I mean, we saw it against the Giants. He looked pretty good. And even against the Vikings, he only had 1 carry, but that 1 carry was a pretty powerful 11-yard carry. And obviously, your fullback, in quotes, on this team is Cameron Latu, who we haven't seen him get any touches, but in terms of blocking, he's been pretty solid. He's been a really good special teamer as well. So yeah, the running back position gets a B+. And we're sticking with that same grade with the wide receivers. And I said the same thing last year, and I'm saying it again. Wide receiver is kind of a tricky grade here, because if I'm grading just the top two, AJ and Devontae, this grade would be higher, but we're looking at the position as a whole. And outside of AJ and Devontae, it's been largely unproductive. Some of that their own fault, some of that not. Starting off with AJ, who's been the hot button player of Philly for good and bad reasons the last month plus. He isn't having the season that we all expected him to have. I don't think it's anything to do with him. I think it's been more schematics and the things that they've asked him to do. I just feel like they haven't been leaning into his strengths a ton. But on the contrary, Devontae Smith looks really good. He's on pace for a career here, and I've really liked the way they've used Devontae Smith in this offense, and I hope that they can maybe find a way to kind of meld the way they use Devontae Smith into the way they use AJ as well, and get them both going so they can both be happier. Dotson's a little tricky because he's made, when he's had catches, they've been pretty important plays. Again, he had the 51-yarder in the opener. He had a 29-yard catch, I believe, against the Broncos that set up the Hail Mary attempt, and then he had the touchdown last week where he lost the dude. Now, on the flip side, going back to that Broncos game, he had some miscues and plays that took what could have been a nice play where he got the nice catch. It could have been a game where he could have had close to 80-plus receiving yards if he had made certain catches. He could have had potentially even more than that. That was a game of just missed opportunities for this offense in totality, but I didn't think he played very well there. There's been times where he's had bad route running, and that showed on the interception against the Giants. In terms of the other receivers, we haven't seen a ton of Darius Cooper yet, just really mix into this offense. John Mechie was here, he's since been traded. That's pretty much it. We saw Xavier Gibson get a little flip, but the Eagles haven't really leaned on the depth at receiver a ton this year. They've been more of a heavier personnel offense, and that seems to be their strength. So I guess I would say wide receiver in totality has been a B+, but that's mostly been lifted up by Devontae and AJ. And then we go to tight end, which I'm going to give a B. And I originally gave them a lower grade, but I think the season that Dallas Goedert is having has really been carrying this position group, because the tight ends, besides Goedert, none of them have been largely productive as receivers, and the blocking especially has been a huge reason why the run game has not been better. And even some of the pass concepts. I think about a play, I've brought up this play before, first play of the game against the Chiefs. The Eagles run this play-action concept. It's supposed to be a deep shot to AJ. Grant loses his block. It allows the blitzer to get to Jalen and just blew up the play. It's again, the Eagles really don't have that blocking tight end. Their answer to that has been, a combination of Cameron Latu as a fullback and then Fred Johnson as the extra offensive lineman. Their backup tight ends are not great blockers. I kind of wish the Eagles would lean into that and use them as kind of mismatches downfield as receivers, because Grant's a pretty solid receiver and so is Granson, but to not do that, again, they haven't been very productive. Goddard's having a great season. He's on pace to have the most touchdowns ever by an Eagles tight end in the season. I think if he gets one more, he's already second. 3 more will tie him for first. So we'll see how far that goes, but he's already hit his career high. He hasn't necessarily been huge with the yardage this year, but he's been productive in the red zone, and I've been wanting to see that out of Goedert for a while, so I'm glad that we're finally getting the start to see Dallas Goedert become a huge red zone threat for this team. The offensive line, I'm going to give them a B-, and if we're doing this off of pass blocking, it would be an A. But the run blocking, especially in the interior, has been really poor through the early going of this season. Now, we'll see if that continues to improve. We've seen it improve the last couple of weeks. But it was a huge problem, and it was a problem why they were not running the ball. And it's kind of what I was hinting to with Saquon. And I think that when you're a run-heavy offense and you're not able to establish yourself as a run-heavy team, I think it cost them in games this year. I think it cost them against the Broncos. Not being able to, you're up multiple scores in the fourth quarter, you should be able to run that clock out and end the game quickly. They didn't do that. And instead they lost that game. Stuff like that. Other games like against the Bucks, not being able to run the ball, you kind of just kept, the offense stalled out, and then Jalen wasn't hitting anything late in that game, so everything was just kind of not working. So the offensive line has to be better at run blocking. They've been pretty good at pass blocking, so as a whole, I do think that they're not terrible, and I saw improvements. I'm giving them the B-. And now we flip to the defense. We start with the defensive tackle position, which I'm giving a B overall. Now, we're having breakout seasons by Moro Ojimo and Jordan Davis, but at the same time, I think we can say as fans, we've been a little disappointed by Jalen Carter's production this year. Obviously, he's been dealing with injury, and obviously he had his incident week 1, but, you know, a lot of us expected Jalen Carter to be the guy on this defense, that a lot of what this defense does is revolved around him, but I think him not being up to snuff this year has really affected things. And I honestly think it has made the problems at other defensive positions look worse, because he himself has not been his usual dominant self. The other defensive tackles have just kind of been fine, but I do think that this has been the better group overall along the defensive line, so I'm giving it a B, but I do think that I expect this grade to probably get better, because I do think we started to see some flashes from Jalen Carter in the most recent games. Next we go to edge, which I'm giving a C grade. Now note, this is not factoring in Jalen Phillips, who the Eagles just traded for. This is based off of the players they've had here. And it's a little bit of a problem when this group has been largely unproductive this season, where among the edge rushers, the leading sacker is a guy who's currently retired. We expected a jump from, we expected growth from Nolan Smith. He's been hurt most of the year. We expected a little more from Jalix Hunt. We haven't really seen that. We just haven't seen the production from this group that we hoped, and losing Josh Sweat really hurts, because, I mean, Josh Sweat has almost double the sacks that this group has this year. I knew that the Eagles wouldn't be able to re-sign Sweat, but we hope that they'd be able to bridge the gap a little better than they have. It's just been a largely unproductive group. Now, with the addition of Phillips, I expect this grade to get better, because Phillips himself has had a pretty solid season. If he can get this group going, you get Nolan back hopefully this week, you're going to mix in Brandon Graham, now we can start looking at this in totality and say, okay, this is a much deeper group than what it was maybe earlier this season, where you've got a nice mix of youth and experience on this line, where you can mix in some interesting personnel groupings and find ways to generate better pressure as the season goes on. But what I think is the strongest group on the team is the linebacker position with an A, because the linebacker position features a linebacker who might be another All-Pro this year, a linebacker who could be Defensive Rookie of the Year, and Nakobe Dean, who's having a nice solid season himself since coming back from injury. It's the biggest problem with this position. It's just hard to play all three at the same time. You know, you don't want to take Bond off the field. You don't want to ruin Jahad Campbell's development, but you also, Kobe has valuable skill sets that can help this defense out. So hopefully they spend time over the bye week going over that. But I look at this defense, and the linebackers have been the biggest reason why this defense has managed to keep itself together for most of the season. So yeah, I'm going to give them an A. I think it's the strongest position group on the team, and that's not factoring in guys like Jeremiah Trotter and Smile Mondon that haven't gotten many snaps this season as linebackers in meaningful situations. And then we go from what I consider the strongest position group to the weakest, and that's the corner position. And I gave it a C-, and it's really tough giving this position such a low grade, considering that two of the team's best players are at corner. Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell have been really good this season. I think my personal hot take is I think Coop's been the best player on the defense this year, the most consistent week in and week out. He hasn't necessarily had like the splash plays that Bond has had, but I think he's been consistently reliable. You know, I think about the play against Justin Jefferson against the Vikings, or the tackle for loss, the near strip sack. It just feels like Coop consistently makes clutch plays every week. Quinyon's having a pretty good season. I don't think it's been quite as good as we expect. We thought he'd be in that All-Pro category. I'd say he's been more in the Pro Bowl category corner, which is not bad at all. You know, we'll see how far he goes. We still haven't gotten any interceptions out of him. And again, this position group also just hasn't had any interceptions. Corners actually have not had picks in the regular season since 2023, who ironically the last corner to get a pick for this team was Keely Ringo on Christmas against the Giants. But speaking of Keely Ringo, he's had a very up and down season, and him, Adoree Jackson, and Jacorian Bennett have kind of been the reason why this grade is as low as it is. It's just been a position that's been rather unreliable, and it's been, I think, to that Thursday night game against the Giants. The performance of Keely Ringo on that game really soured me on his role in this defense. Adoree Jackson's been solid-ish, but the big problem with me is I don't love his C's get degrees attitude, and you see that pop up on play sometimes. I think about the turn down in the red zone against the Giants, not trying to tackle Scadaboo, giving up another touchdown. It's just one of those things where it's like, it's veterans like, I'm just trying to get out of here. You know, C's get degrees, I'll get by. I just don't like that mentality for this team. Jacorian Bennett, we haven't seen a ton of, but a lot of it hasn't been very good, if we're just being honest. So that's a tricky, conversation to have. It just feels like the Eagles have not figured it out. We'll see what they have now with Jair and Michael Carter in the mix. But hopefully this bye week they've had some time to figure out how to solidify this position. Because if they can't get it right, looking at these NFC teams, if you want to get to the Super Bowl in the NFC, you got to go to Tampa. You got to take on Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Emeka Egbuka. You got to go against the Rams with Puka and Devontae. You got to go up against the Lions. You got to face Amon-Ra and Jamison Williams. You got to face all these really good cores. The Seahawks with JSN and now Rashid Shaheed. You got to beat all those guys. It's funny because the Eagles play a lot of those teams this year, and they've beaten the Rams and Bucks, but we can also admit that those were not their best defensive performances at times in those games. Safety, I'm going to give a solid B, too. I think the safety position has been a little stronger for the defense. Obviously, Reed he's been pretty steady. He hasn't had any interceptions yet this year. He hasn't really had opportunities, but I think he's played fine in the defense this year. Makuba's been a little up and down as the safety. We have good Makuba and bad Makuba, and when Makuba's good, it's really good, and when it's bad, it's pretty bad. But you give him a lot of a pass because he's a rookie, he's still learning. And I feel, each week I'm used to the bad plays, but I feel like we're starting to see a little bit of a point where it's a little bit less each week, and hopefully he can continue to build off of it. So, Makuba. And you have Sidney Brown, who initially was getting reps on the defense. He's since mostly been relegated to special teams. So it's really just about Makuba and Reed, but I think together they're a solid B safety tandem. And last but not least, we have special teams, which I've given a B-. This was mostly reflective of the returns early in the season. Special teams was actively hurting the team by its inability to return the ball effectively through a lot of games, most notably against the Giants and Rams. But we have now seen special teams. We have two, special teams return touchdowns, a blocked punt and a blocked field goal. Jake Elliott has been pretty good, although he's missed kicks in those last two games. Braden Mann has continued to bomb punts like it's nothing. So he's been a weapon for us. And it feels like the Eagles have found something in Xavier Gibson. He's done a pretty good job returning kicks. He's even mixed in returning punts. I hope that kind of continues because I think he's better at it than Dotson. But, so that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, when the season ends, we'll revisit these grades and I'll give my opinion and see how much these grades increase and hopefully don't decrease. But anyway, this has been Bird Braid. Hope you guys enjoyed being nerdy today. Fly Eagles fly. See you around.